It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker and performer, Scott O'Neill. But first, I'd like to read out of a book in the Chinese language for about an hour and 30 minutes to you. Some people might think that's pretty much the same kind of experience that you have when you go to the Symphony, because even though it might sound pleasant, you might say, I'm not sure just anything that went on there. I don't understand it. I'm so pleased to have Scott join us today because his innovation and his baby, if you will, at the Colorado Symphony is a series that I've been a subscriber for its life, and it's called Inside the Score. It's a performance, talk, education, and enlightenment concert. And Scott is expert at explaining things about composers, styles, eras, phrases, motifs, key changes, all sorts of technical things that he brings down and helps people who maybe are uncomfortable about being in the symphony setting because they don't speak the language, but now they're able to better enjoy and understand the components that they're hearing from our fine symphony orchestra. Scott's going to share a little of that concept with us today, so please give a warm Rotary welcome to Scott O'Neill, Associate Conductor of the Colorado Symphony. Scott.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for Sherry for reading that one of my favorite poems, Rudyard Kipling's If. I'm actually going to read a little poetry to you as well. But before I do, thanks to Doug for the introduction. When we think about music and trying to understand it better, one of my inspirations, I think you may have a special connection to, Paul Harvey used to have a radio program where he would give a story and you would be convinced you knew exactly what you thought of that story. And then they would take a break and he would come back and he'd say, now for the rest of the story. And then he would tell you something that would completely change your opinion of what you had heard of the first part of the story. I find that's often true with music, where if we hear it, there is a level of enjoyment that we can get just from the aesthetic perception of the music. But if we actually understand what's behind it, there's a greater, deeper appreciation. They've shown that when musicians listen to music, they hook up the EKG, and when musicians listen to music, they don't just use the portion of their brain associated with hearing. They use their entire brain. You might think, well, how do they do that? I'm going to help you do that today. We don't have EKGs to test it, but you'll feel it. One of the most popular piano pieces ever composed is Debussy's, not Prelude to the Afternoon of the Faun. That's my favorite piece. It's called Clair de Lune. It's by the moonlight. And it's so famous that Google Doodle, if you've seen this, if you go to Google, sometimes they'll have an active sign for Google, and you click on it, and it becomes an entire video presentation. That's called Google Doodle. And the most popular Google Doodle ever created was that on Clair de Lune. That's how famous this piece is. When you've made it to Google Doodle, you've arrived. The piece is actually based on poetry, unlike Rudyard Kipling's If. This poem is by a French poet by the name of Paul Verlaine, and the poem goes like this. Your soul is a chosen landscape where charming masqueraders and bergamaskers go playing the lute and dancing, almost sad beneath their fanciful disguises. All sing in a minor key of victorious love and the opportune life. They do not seem to believe in their happiness, and their song mingles with the moonlight, with the still moonlight, sad and beautiful, that sets the birds dreaming in the trees and the fountains sobbing in ecstasy, the tall, slender fountains among the marble statues. So he's creating this almost kind of classic Greek scene with classic marble statues where the fountains don't spout water, they, quote, sob in ecstasy. And the people who are singing about their victorious love and opportune life sing in a minor key. Why? Because they don't seem to believe in their happiness. So even though this is a very joyous and very positive idea, it's tinged with a bit of melancholy, right? Very French, yes? So I'm going to play this for you now. Keep this poem in mind, and I've also got some visuals that I think I, as a musician, when I hear this piece, this is kind of what I think of, and by thinking of the poetry, seeing the visuals, and hearing the music, you're well on your way to using your entire brain listening to the music. So this is Clair de Lune by Debussy. Thank you. If I can stay here, I need to demonstrate some of what I'm going to say at the piano. So going on with this idea of how can we understand music? Well, that was a very kind of aesthetic approach. We had artistic poetry, we had visual, we had music. It's all hitting different senses. And I realized while I was playing that you wonder what performers think while they're playing. What I was thinking during part of it was, wait, I said they hooked us up to EKGs. That's wrong. It's CAT scans. So that's how they can understand what we're thinking. Now you understand one reason why Scott's not a doctor. So one way of looking at how music can express very tangible ideas, we've explored recently in a project that we've done jointly with Aero Electronics. Our friend Rich Keilberg came to us and said, look, we'd like to get a sound logo, Aero Electronics, 5 years out. How can you write that for us? And so we thought, well, can you express this in music? And the truth is, yes, we can. Well, how do you do that? Okay, so let's think about this. 5 years out, Aero. The idea is that if you're thinking more than 5 years out, you're just dreaming, and if you're thinking less than 5 years out, you're not moving fast enough. And Aero, okay, Aero. So what could we do? Well, we could spell arrow in musical pitches. Now, in the musical alphabet, we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but normally it would repeat again, A, B, C, D, E, F, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Well, that's a problem if you're trying to spell something with R, R, O, W. So if we instead used the musical alphabet where instead of stopping at A, B, C, D, E, F, G and repeating, you simply keep wait, it's not going on its own, is it? Yeah, you just keep going H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, etc. I just want to make sure it's not advancing by itself. Okay, good. So using this alphabet, we could spell arrow, A-R-R-O-W. Well, the problem is it is going on its own. So I'm just going to keep telling it to go back until, okay. So if we put all those in one octave, one register, that would be A-R-R-O-W. Hey, spelling arrow in pitches doesn't sound too bad. Now, if we wanted to spell it another way, we could actually spell it rhythmically in Morse code. So if we look at A, it's short, long. Don't do that. It's short, long. And we could repeat it over and again. A, A, A. What if we did R? Come down to the bottom. I like that because it's short, long, short. And you repeat that over and again. That's cool because it develops the idea of short, long by adding a short at the end. Good, that's going to move us along. What about O? O is going to be a little bit of a challenge. It's just, all right, well, we'll deal with that when we get there. But then W, on the second line, third one down, W, this gets cool. Short, long, long. I like the syncopation of that. So we've got spelling arrow melodically and rhythmically. Now, let's take this idea of 5 years out. There's a lot of potential here. So first of all, 5. Well, we could, if already we've got 5 in the 5 notes of A-R-R-O-W because there happen to be 5 letters in the word arrow. So we're already one step along there. Another way to express 5 in music is something we call the pentatonic scale. Penta, because there are 5 notes in it. That scale looks like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it repeats. And lo and behold, our arrow idea fits in the pentatonic scale. So, we talk about happy coincidences. For composers, this is an ecstatic coincidence. So we've got those 2 ideas. But then you've got something, I'm just going to, I almost feel like I've got this gnome behind me. Is he behaving? Ah, see, there went it. Okay, so I caught him. So the 5th scale degree in music. Yeah, I mean it. Stay. You. Okay. Okay. Gremlins, right? So the 5th scale degree in music, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is something that a lot of composers use to express something very triumphant, like Beethoven is in the last movement of his 5th symphony. He does 1, 3, 5, or Mahler in his 1st symphony. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. So the 5th scale degree has this natural tendency to lead itself to expressing something triumphant. So we can use that in trying to express the idea of 5. So what if we set the phrase 5 years out using the 5th scale degree? We start on 5 and go and rock it up. 5 years out, which looks like that. 5 years out. You do it a couple times. Sounds like triumphant fanfare to me. Good. Just making sure I don't give away my next secret. So let's just take stock of these 5 ideas that we've got so far. We've got arrow spelled melodically. We've got arrow spelled rhythmically. We've got 5 expressed as the 5 letters of arrow. We've got 5 expressed in the pentatonic scale. And we've got 5 expressed in the 5th scale degree set to the phrase 5 years out. Now, those are our ingredients. But what do they sound like when you put them together? Well, when performed by my colleagues at the Colorado Symphony, they sound like this. There's Morse code for A. R. We're going to pause it there. So the idea is that we've built all these ideas together. So now, once you've heard this, you know that 5 years out is kind of their motto and is the idea of arrow. So their sound signature becomes... And so that's how the segment ends. And so I presented this to Rich Keilberg, and he said, great, I love it. Can you make it longer? Sure, we can add to it. Let's see, how do I want to... So one of their ideas, this isn't going to cooperate with me, so I'm going to try something else. One of their ideas that they talk about 5 years out is taking care of the planet. And if you're going to produce things like, say, cell phones, people are going to own a lot of cell phones over the rest of their lives. So what do you do about the cell phones that have to be recycled? And so they wanted to have a theme that expressed, caring for the earth. And so I came up with something that... But again, I want to have this kind of noble victory to it. Now, some of you may know that at the end of World War II, the idea of V for victory, they used the rhythm of Beethoven's Fifth. Why? Because in Morse code, V is short, 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 long. And it just so happens to be the same as Beethoven's 5. Right? So I'm going to use this idea of V after short, 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 long. And my friends are going to turn this into another theme. So The other thing, the main theme that we have for Arrow is based on the 5 years out idea. And let me go back and pick that up for you. It'll be quick. Never mind this. Pay no attention to the man behind the screen, or the screen behind the man. There we go. That's the one. No. I love technology, don't you? Okay. We were about to see Claire de Lune in reverse, so fortunately that didn't happen. Got our 5 elements. Then the main theme becomes, right. Okay, here we are. Now, you take the idea of 5 years out. Then, since it's rocketed up, you balance that by coming down. And since you want to have more than one layer to it so it doesn't seem too simple, you have the same thing. So together they became. So that you'll hear that theme recur a number of times. But now we're going to go to the next section, which is based on this theme. And then the victory. And it sounds like this. Oh, the other thing that you should know, the background, we're going to take this melody, and we're going to slowly turn it into the background. So whereas before is how the piece started, and then it became the signature, so the background becomes the foreground. Now we're going to take the foreground and turn it into the background by that's going to be your background for, and that's what this is. B. We take this idea, we change one note to become a new melody. Now we have variations on that melody. Piano's playing Arrow in Morse code, by the way. We'll hear the same thing later. Arrow. Then, of course, Rich, being Rich, said, I like that. Can you make it longer? So, at this point, I really needed to stretch with what I was going to try to express. So, in various ways, A and R and O all belong to this one key, right? It's when we go here, that's something new. So, what we're going to do now, and I'm going to race ahead to... There's our score. Now joining our regularly scheduled program. Okay, good. Now what we're going to do next is use the idea of 5 years out and Arrow. We're going to have and 5 years out now in the bass. And we're going to modulate to the key of W, also known as B. Or we can call it B plus because there's going to be an extra little pitch here. Now, how do you express W in a theme? So here's our 5 years out. A-R-R-O-W. Now we're really going to express W. And if you thought things were a little kooky before, now they're really going to get kooky. So we take the main theme and we flip it upside down and put it, so instead of, we do. But let's do it at this point, because we're in the key of W after all. And instead of doing a major version, let's do a minor version. So now the flute is going to play an upside down version of the main theme with an extra note. And just to show, point out to our ear that this is an upside down version of the main theme, the trombone is going to play that upside, the right side up version simultaneously so we can hear the mirror movement. Now, if we treated these not as a series of pitches, but as tracing basic shapes, that would look like this, right? So once we have those shapes, let's get rid of the notes so that we can really focus on the shapes. So there are the shapes. Now, it may not jump out at you right now what's happening, but can you see it? What about now? Or how about now? So, what the flute was actually doing was tracing the letter W. Meanwhile, the trombone was tracing an A by playing the main theme, which I didn't tell you before, but now you know the main theme actually was tracing A all along. So I promise it doesn't get any kookier than that. So the other way that we can express ideas in music, and this is probably the most popular way a lot of composers do this, is if you have a theme that you already know the meaning of it, we can quote that theme that you know the meaning of, thereby borrowing the meaning of that theme for our purposes. So you may have noticed that our 5 years out idea sounds an awful lot like what I think is the greatest fanfare ever written, Fanfare for the Common Man. And of course, it's based on the same 5-1-5. But as the piece is gone, not just 5-1-5, but 1-5-1 has become important. And that you'll hear demonstrated in this next section, whereas 5-1-5 represents striving of mankind. When you get to 1-5-1, this comes from a piece meant to express the creation of the world. If you've seen Space Odyssey 2001, it actually makes sense with this, the baby who's being born. Also, sprach Zarathustra is the creation of the world. So that's where we get 1-5-1. So 5-1-5 represents the common man. 1-5-1 is Zarathustra. This is man-made. This is divine. This is work. This is inspiration. This is the practical. This is the possible. And this is what Rich came to me and said, when we were trying to reach for what we could express, he said, that 5 years out, that magical point, that's where the practical meets the possible. How do we express that? Like this. Now, you're going to hear whenever we hear the main theme, you're also going to hear an accompaniment to that. So we've got 5-1-5. You're also going to hear an expression. Or the simultaneous expression of 151, the practical, and 515, the practical, and 151, the possible, the divine. Meanwhile, we're going to link those two in a background pattern where the violins are playing, thereby expressing all these ideas together. Now, you might wonder, so what? That's very clever, but what's the point? Well, for me, science is the study of how things happen, study of phenomenon. Invention is the use of ideas to combine and recombine to create new ideas. And art is the use of science and invention to try to express something. What is it trying to express? Sometimes it's just that ephemeral perception of moonlight on a lake. Sometimes it's something as tangible as overcoming odds, working and becoming victorious. And sometimes it expresses that magical moment where the practical meets the possible, where your work meets inspiration, where your work can become your inspiration. And I'm fortunate in my job with the Colorado Symphony that that's kind of where I live, where my work is also my inspiration. So I want to let music speak last, but I want to thank you for having me. It's been an honor to speak to you, and this is the final culmination of the practical and the possible. And it starts, of course, with the victory theme in the basses. There's the divine, and now the mankind. Listen for the drums, they're going to play that Morse code. W. Flute begins for W.
Thank you, Scott. If you could come up on stage, I'd love to have you up here. Well, that was really I have a feeling, a CT scan or an EEG maybe.
EEG,
would
thank
be
you.
telling me that my mind is really expanding. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
You.
I wanted to present you a couple of gifts today. First of all, every year we honor someone from the baseball community, professional baseball, for their community service and their abilities on the field. And this is to commemorate that. Last year, our Branch Rickey Award was given to Clayton Kershaw, who had apparently a wonderful game yesterday. This is to honor him, and we'd like to invite you back November 14th for this year's event.
Outstanding.
In addition, in honor of your time here today, we are going to give a gift from our foundation to Polio Plus, which is Rotary International's effort to eradicate polio. Enough funds to, along with a match from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to inoculate 150 children against polio. So thank you so much for your presentation today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I remember the first time I ever scuba dived, it was like I was in another world, and today I sort of felt that way as well, kind of peering into this world. I do have a question for you, and then we'll ask for questions from the audience as well really quickly. How many symphonies are created in this way, or is this something really unusual?
So a lot of composers have used ideas like this to, Schumann loved his wife Clara so much that he created all these themes based on her name, Clara. Berg did the same thing with his name. Shostakovich would sign his pieces, so to speak, with a certain motto that spells SCH, E flat. So it's been the inspiration for a lot of ideas, but this dense of trying to account for every note having some kind of meaning, this is, to my knowledge, pretty unique.
That's fantastic. Other questions? Will, have you seen one over here? Okay. Craig.
Thanks for your presentation. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, when we look at this looks like a mathematical equation.
Right.
So is that normal when you put that together? And how did you explain this to Rich?
Rich got this straight away, and one of the things that I didn't mention with this is that not only is the math present that we spoke of, but some of the proportions, and I take this from composers like Debussy, who did the same thing, and Bartók, where if you're trying to figure out how should I proportion this piece, they use the same principles that the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians used, where if you take the proportion is called a golden mean, or the golden section, where if you take a line and divide that line at 0.618, there's a kind of a magical thing that happens there, that the proportion of the small part is to the big part as the big part is to the whole. In other words, this is 61.8% of this, and this is 61.8% of all of it. So at that point, if you took that and then turned it this way, now you've got a rectangle, and if you did the same thing, so you take this, 61.8% of that length, now you're going to go this direction. Now 61.8% of that length, and you're going to go this direction. 61.8 of that, keep going, and then if you draw a spiral, you get what's called a golden spiral, and lo and behold, that's how nautilus shells grow. You can do the same thing to a circle, and you come up with an angle, and lo and behold, that's how poplar trees grow. And there's another way you can come up with 0.618, something called the Fibonacci number series, where it's an additive series. You take 1 plus 2, and you add them together, you get 3. Now you go back. 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 5 plus 8 is 13, on and on. Now if you take any two consecutive numbers and turn them into a fraction, 2/3 is 66.66, repeating. 3/5 is 0.60. 5/8 is a little bit less than this. 8/13 comes here, and you keep zeroing in, but you never reach 0.618. So by using the golden mean and the Fibonacci number series, we can come up with this great proportion. So the other thing that happened was all the climaxes occurred at the golden mean of their sections. So is there math in music? Like you would never believe.
I think that's probably another program, Jim. Keep that in mind, the math behind music.
We'll do golden mean. And
we have time for one more question back here.
Parthenon is built on the same principles, by the way.
My question is, are you going to publish the Aero Symphony?
Good question. If I can give you a secret, we'll keep this among us. That's my opus 1. I'm cursed with the fact that, like, when you're sitting if you work on other people's music, eventually you come up with your own idea, and when you do, you have this aha, like, oh wow, that sounds great, and I would write it down, and I'd have this idea, and what are you going to turn that into later? Well, before I could flesh that out, I got to study the music of Beethoven and Mahler and Debussy, and when I look at their stuff and I compared it to mine, I went, never mind. So the only reason I had the courage to write this was because I thought it was just going to be the background to a 55-second commercial, which is why that first section is the way it is. So I thought, well, I can't compose a symphony, but I can write 55 seconds of a crescendo to the background of a commercial, sure. So are there plans to publish it? what would it be, an overture? I don't know. So right now, Arrow's using it. If you call Arrow and you get put on hold, this is the music you hear. If you're an Arrow employee and they're trying to inspire you as to why you work the way you do, you hear this. If you go online and look at Arrow's website, this music plays. So can I publish it? Yeah, maybe. Again, I look at that and then I look at a Mahler symphony and I'm like, well, go ahead and play it on the background of a telephone, but I don't know about it. We'll see.
Well, as Rudyard Kipling said, keep getting up and keep trying.
Absolutely.
So thank you again for being here. Let's all
Thank you.
Scott McNeil.